We're looking at 37,000 manufacturing jobs that have disappeared in the U.S., and factory employment is now at its lowest point in 5 years, which is not a good sign. The United States and Canada, two neighboring nations and each other's largest trading partners, are entering a turbulent phase in their relationship. More than 90% of essential energy and goods come from the north to states like Maine and Vermont, where local economies rely heavily on hydroelectric power, seafood, and timber from Canada. In North Dakota, the agriculture sector is tied to fertilizer and crude oil from Saskatchewan, while Michigan, the heart of America's automotive industry, depends on components, steel, and aluminum imported across the Windsor border. What will happen to these states and the millions of people who live there? Join Globe Chaos Insights as we take a closer look at these 5 states. Number 5. Montana, border stretching nearly 900 kilometers along Canada's Alberta and Saskatchewan provinces, has long been regarded as America's northern energy gateway. According to 2024 trade data, 92% of the state's total import value comes from Canada, equal to more than $4.5 billion USD, the highest dependency rate among all 50 U.S. states. This figure is 7 times higher than the national average of just around 13%. Canadian goods dominate the market. Montana receives the majority of its oil from Alberta's oil fields via the Keystone and Express pipeline systems, then distributes it to the Midwest and Pacific Northwest states. Natural gas is imported through the Trans-Canada pipeline, directly connected to Montana's domestic distribution network. Nearly 20% of Montana's electricity demand is met by hydroelectric plants in Saskatchewan, especially during the harsh winter months. Alberta and British Columbia supply large quantities of lumber, plywood, and pulp to Montana, serving the construction, furniture, and printing industries. Wheat, canola, beef, and milk also move across the border, with more than 300,000 truck crossings annually, accounting for nearly 70% of all goods traffic between Montana and Canada. Energy pipelines, including the Keystone and Enbridge mainline, pump hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil per day through Montana, serving not only in-state demand, but also acting as a strategic transit route for the entire U.S. railways, like BNSF, run directly from Calgary to Billings, enabling fast transport of agricultural goods, fertilizers, and industrial equipment. Montana has a low population density, but high per capita energy consumption due to its severe climate and long transport distances. If Canada were to impose energy export taxes or cut production, while fertilizer and machinery imports face delays or price spikes, Montana would be forced to purchase expensive power from other states. Since the U.S. imposed a 25% tariff on many Canadian goods in 2025, Alberta has considered restricting oil and gas exports to the U.S. For Montana, this state is not just a border region. It is a strategic choke point in U.S. Canada trade and energy relations. If this relationship fractures deeply, Montana will be on the front line of a crisis, facing rising fuel and electricity prices, job losses, and energy insecurity. Number 4. Maine. Maine, the northeasternmost state of the U.S., shares a border of nearly 1,000 kilometers with Canada's provinces of New Brunswick and Quebec. It has long been regarded as the commercial gateway for trade and goods exchange between New England and Canada's Atlantic seaboard. According to 2024 trade data, 72% of Maine's total import value comes from Canada, equal to roughly $3.2 billion USD, making it the second highest dependency rate among all 50 U.S. states. Maine imports large quantities of lobster, snow crab, cod, and Atlantic salmon from the waters off New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Many seafood processing plants in Portland, Rockland, and Eastport rely directly on this supply to produce exports for European and Asian markets. Hydroelectric power from Hydro-Quebec's large dams accounts for nearly 25% of Maine's winter electricity consumption, helping to keep power prices stable and reduce reliance on natural gas. Heating oil and liquefied propane from Canada are the main fuels for rural heating systems in Maine. Canada also supplies saw lumber, wood pulp, and newsprint to Maine, supporting an industry that was once a pillar of the state's economy. Many paper mills in Millinocket, Rumford, and Skowhegan source raw materials directly via cross-border rail and road links. The Madawaska-Edmundston International Bridge directly connects Maine's wood and paper processing industrial zones with New Brunswick. Ports such as Eastport and Portland receive seafood and lumber shipments from Canada before distribution across the U.S. or export abroad, while the Maine Northern Railway transports pulp, lumber, and light industrial goods from Canada deep into New England. If Canada imposed export quotas or raised tariffs on seafood, Maine's seafood industry would be crippled, as it could not quickly source replacements of equal quality and proximity. The power grid would come under heavy strain if Hydro-Quebec reduced electricity sales, forcing Maine to import costlier electricity from other states during winter. The paper and lumber industries would also face raw material shortages, potentially causing thousands of job losses. Since the 19th century, Maine has been part of U.S. Canada maritime trade routes, especially in lumber and fishing. This relationship was strengthened by NAFTA and later the USMCA, allowing nearly tariff-free trade. However, amid the trade tensions of 2025, U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and agricultural goods prompted New Brunswick to threaten retaliation by restricting energy and seafood exports to Maine. Thus, Maine is not just a gateway linking New England's economy to Canada. It is also a strategic node for energy and seafood. Any disruption from the north would quickly trigger a chain reaction affecting production, jobs, and livelihoods across the state. If this shocked you, wait till what's next. Hit subscribe now. Number 3. Vermont, one of the smallest states in the U.S., with an area of only about 24,900 square kilometers and fewer than 650,000 people, is surprisingly dependent on Canada, especially Quebec. Despite being entirely within U.S. territory, Vermont's economy and livelihoods are deeply intertwined with Canada, to the point where separation would be difficult. Vermont is famous for cheddar cheese, butter, Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and maple syrup. But some of the ingredients, such as grains, barley, and refined sugar, are imported from Canada due to limited farmland and climate. The state's craft beer industry depends on barley and hops from Quebec and Ontario. Vermont's ski resorts, like Stowe and Jay Peak, attract Canadian visitors, particularly from Montreal, only 2 hours away. Statistics show that 40% of Vermont's international visitors are Canadian, contributing hundreds of millions of dollars annually to hospitality, restaurants, and entertainment. Vermont shares more than 140 kilometers of border with Quebec and relies on imports to stabilize costs and supply due to its limited energy and agricultural resources. Vermont and Quebec's trade and energy relations have been strong for over 40 years, creating an integrated economic ecosystem. However, if Canada raised prices or reduced electricity exports, Vermont would be forced to buy from the federal grid at 30 to 40% higher prices. Likewise, if Canadian tourists declined, ski-dependent towns could lose tens of millions in revenue. Vermont may be small, but its dependence on Canada spans energy, production inputs, and tourism. Any changes in Canada's policies could trigger immediate effects across the state, making Vermont almost an extension of the northern economy. Number 2. North Dakota, located in the northern prairie region of the U.S., shares borders with Manitoba and Saskatchewan. With a population of about 780,000, its economy relies heavily on energy and agriculture, both deeply tied to Canada. A significant portion of North Dakota's electricity is exchanged through an interconnected grid with Manitoba Hydro, allowing the state to access clean hydroelectric power during peak demand, while exporting coal and gas-generated power back to Canada in winter. Food processing and oilseed crushing plants import supplemental raw materials from Manitoba and Saskatchewan, while crops such as peas and oats are exported to Canada for processing before re-entering the U.S. market. Canada is North Dakota's #1 trade partner, accounting for over 80% of its international export value. Key Key trade includes crude oil, refined petroleum, grains, fertilizers, and pipeline shipments. Pipelines like Enbridge's mainline transport Canadian oil through North Dakota to other U.S. states, while agriculture and energy sectors on both sides operate as a single network. Trade with Canada allows North Dakota to save significantly on transportation costs compared to selling to distant states. However, if electricity imports from Manitoba were cut, power prices would spike, affecting oil fields, refineries, and farms. North Dakota is not merely a neighbor, it is a key link in the shared U.S. Canada energy and agriculture system. Any rupture in this relationship could trigger an economic shock across the state. And yeah, this part, most mainstream media won't even touch it. If you're the kind of person who wants the full story, hit that subscribe button now. Number 1. Michigan, with Lansing as its capital and Detroit as the cradle of the U.S. automobile industry, has some of the deepest economic ties to Canada. Positioned next to Ontario with bridges and tunnels across the Detroit River, Michigan is a lifeline for goods flowing between the two countries. Detroit and Windsor are often called the twin cities of the North American auto sector. Over a quarter of Michigan's auto parts originate from Ontario and Quebec, and many plants rely on just-in-time delivery, meaning even short border delays can halt production. Each year, auto parts and finished vehicles crossing between Michigan and Canada are worth over $60 billion. Michigan also imports natural gas from Ontario via Enbridge pipelines, while part of its gasoline is refined in Sarnia and shipped through the Blue Water Bridge. Canadian hydroelectricity supports Michigan's grid during summer peaks, while grains, vegetables, and dairy from Canada supplement its markets in winter. In return, Michigan exports apples, cherries, and processed goods to Ontario, forming a closed-loop supply chain. The Ambassador Bridge and Detroit-Windsor Tunnel, the busiest trade crossing in North America, handle over 8,000 trucks daily. Great Lakes ports and railways ensure fast, low-cost transport since the 1960s. Following the U.S. Canada auto trade agreements, production has been divided, with components made in Canada and assembled in the U.S. natural gas and electricity from Canada help Michigan lower costs and stabilize energy prices. If the border closed for even a couple of days, automakers like Ford, GM, and Stellantis could lose hundreds of millions due to halted production. If Canadian natural gas imports were cut, Michigan would face 20 to 30% higher costs, hitting both households and industries. More than 250,000 jobs are directly or indirectly tied to Canada. Michigan is not just a neighbor, it is a vital hub in North America's supply chain, and any disruption at the border could have immediate, severe consequences. It's clear that Montana, Maine, Vermont, North Dakota, and Michigan are not just neighbors to Canada on the map, but deeply interconnected through economy, energy, and supply chains. From hydroelectric power, natural gas, fertilizers, and agricultural products to automobile parts, a web of two-way dependence binds them. But because of this close connection, any barrier, whether trade policy shifts, border disruptions, or energy fluctuations, could trigger a domino effect impacting factories, farms, and households. With globalization facing mounting challenges, the question remains: can these states diversify their sources and markets to reduce risk, or will they continue to rely on this lifeline with Canada? One thing is certain: the U.S.-Canada border is not just a national boundary, it is an economic lifeline. And the story of this interdependence will continue to shape the future of America's northern border states for years to come. If you're still watching, you're already ahead of 90% of people who only hear headlines. This is where real understanding starts. Hit subscribe and stay informed where it matters.